Hello, this is David White from Sportsman's Emporium, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about, finding deer on public land, and in particular in big woods and big mountainous areas where the land is vast and there's not a lot of human disturbance, fence lines, fields, the kind of stuff that sort of funnel deer and make it a little easier to hunt some of these travel areas. When you're out in the big woods, and on these mountains, a lot of times you don't have those little things that funnel deer traffic, and they're not as easy to find because you don't have big fields that they're grazing, and you don't have little cut roads and stuff like that. And a lot of times the trees are real big, and when the trees are real big, that means their canopies are really big, and there's not a lot of sunlight hitting the forest floor, and it's basically wide open, and which means you can see really far down through the woods. That can be difficult for some people who just started hunting that way. Finding those big woods bucks can be really rewarding, though, if you can find them, because you can hike miles back in and find these old big deer that do live around here in these mountainous areas of West Virginia. But where do you start? That's the biggest question I think I hear when guys are looking to hunt places like the Mon National Forest or even Cooper's Rock. Where do you start in these big woods? I don't know what to do other than start hiking miles back in the woods and maybe put a trail camera out. Well, there are a few things that you can do and you can research to sort of narrow that down and take some guesswork out of it, and at least give yourself a few destination points. And this can be easily done with satellite imagery. In the days of the internet, we have access to all this stuff. Topographic maps will be your best friend when you're hunting backcountry deer and doing a little more of the adventurous side of hunting. And basically, in general, when you're looking at topo maps and studying an area, that's always what I do before I go into a big woods area to hunt. So I look at the topo maps, I try to pinpoint the low spots and ridges, the flat spots where the contour lines are further apart, basically means where the gradient is less steep. And there's one thing to keep in mind about deer and most game is when you're walking through a big forest that doesn't have roads and trails pre-built, the deer are going to walk where you walk. They're going to take the path of least resistance. If there's a big ridge top that you need to get up from a creek bottom, most likely they're going to find a little spur that comes off that ridge that's a little bit less gradient to walk up that. And we're going to do the same thing without even realizing it most times. If you learn how to read topo maps, you can really recognize those spots without even going there. And you can, like I say, pinpoint a few of your spots. I think the biggest finder for me of like concentrated traffic of deer in these big woods areas are what's called saddles, which are basically low spots and ridges. You get these big mountains that run across, and every once in a while there's going to be a dip or a low spot where maybe a couple little spurs come up the mountain. That's where the deer are really going to move the most. That's where they're going to cross over those ridges. They're going to make it easy for them, as easy as possible. These saddle spots are really easy to find on a topo map if you know what to look for. Depending on your scale, basically if you're looking at a topo map, you see the contour of the mountains, are drawn out in lines. And then between each line is a certain amount of feet in increment, and that's the elevation change during those lines. And different scales are different elevation changes, but that's not really the important part. The important part is you need to find where the saddle spots are. And there's a few key things to look at when you're looking at these contour lines and following these ridges to find these low spots. And it's basically, I drew a little picture right here of what would be a saddle spot. If this was a contour line and this was a contour line, there's going to be a place where those lines don't cross each other and don't go around each other, where two kind of high spots just kind of meet up and then kind of go away from each other. Basically what it ends up looking like is something like this. When you see two contour lines form something like that, and then you got more lines going this way and this way, when you see these little shapes on a topo map, that's probably a saddle spot. And we're going to get some close-ups of an actual topo map where I can show this. I can pretty much tell that this is a steep hillside. You know, this is a ridge up here that stays pretty high, and then it goes really steep down to these creeks. And you can see how it gets steep. Well, up on these ridges, this is a saddle. See how it kind of has that hourglass shape? That's a little low spot on that ridge. It stays pretty high right here, and it goes down a hill, and then it gets low and back up a hill to this peak. When you see those little sort of hourglass shapes, and they can all be slightly different, that is always a good spot to start. As you can see on this one, the contour lines are really far apart going down in here. So this is really steep, so that's a big bluff. I would consider that a steep bluff that drops right down to a creek bottom. And this is a little more gradual down to this creek bottom in here. I would focus on these flatter areas, close to a water source, close to a saddle spot, because they will run down these bluffs to get away from predators, hunters, bear, anything, coyotes. They'll use these, and that's why they'll use these saddle spots to get to them. And what you're looking for is the difference between these lines here. That's very steep terrain. You're not going to want to walk down that, and neither are the deer. If the deer had to walk on something like this, they would choose right here, where these lines are a little bit further apart, and probably angle their way up the hills with their trails. But really easy. You can start, if I were going to hunt an area like this, you know, I would start with this saddle here. Here's another saddle that's kind of a little fatter shaped hourglass, but you can see where the contour lines go away from each other, and that would be a low spot. That's a high spot right there. And then here's a high spot up here. Well, this goes down a hill, and then it bottoms out right here and goes back up. That low spot is really good. That low spot's great. This flatter spot where the lines are wider, this right here is a good travel corridor. And I would focus my hunting in these spots. I would stay away from this stuff here, stay away from that real steep terrain, and look at the easy spots. And that's really it. Study your topos, learn how to read them. There's a lot of great books out there in the age of YouTube. There's tons of information on how to understand these topo maps. I get all mine from a website called caltopo.com. If you really want to get out in the backcountry and you need a starting point, this, in my opinion, is the best way to do it. And then once you're in there, that's kind of on you. You know, you have to close the deal. But to start out, you know, I think a lot of people could narrow it down big time to just a few spots by studying topos.